Welcome back to our channel and the quiet hum of production lines inside the Denver Mint in 2003. Millions of 5-cent coins nickels, as they're known, clinked into collection bins. Each one bore the stoic profile of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and Monticello on the reverse, as it had for decades. It was a year like any other in the realm of U.S. coinage, but hidden among the mundane, buried in the sheer volume of mass production. A subtle anomaly slipped through undetected. No alarms were raised. No production was halted. The machinery hummed on. What emerged, however, would eventually challenge long-held assumptions about quality control and spark a quiet storm among numismatists. The design had remained unchanged since 1938, a portrait by Felix Schlag that had become as familiar to Americans as the faces of their neighbors. By 2003, whispers were already circulating of a future redesign to commemorate the Louisiana Purchase and Lewis and Clark's expedition. Yet that year, in the lull before that transformation, something else began to stir. Something unintentional. A flaw not born of innovation, but of oversight. It began, fittingly, with a collector. Not a dealer, not an expert. Just a man who, like many others, spent his weekends browsing flea markets and local estate sales with a battered magnifying glass in his pocket. He had no reason to suspect the pile of nickels he was flipping through at a yard sale in rural Kentucky would yield anything of interest. Most bore the typical wear: smooth edges, tarnished faces, a haze of years lived in glove compartments and vending machines. But one, just one, held his gaze. It looked normal at first glance. 2003, Denver Mint mark. Common, plentiful. He would have passed it over had he not noticed something off. It wasn't the date, nor Jefferson's expression, nor the typical markers of a proof or uncirculated coin. It was, instead, the rim, or rather, the absence of one. Running his thumb along the coin's edge, he felt no defined border, no raised perimeter to separate design from background. It faded, as if melted. He flipped it under his glass. The words, "In God We Trust, Liberty, 2003." They drifted perilously close to the edge, nearly sheared off by the planchet's curve. On the reverse, Monticello fared no better, sinking into the metal like a house swallowed by rising water. The fields were soft, the striking complete. But the surfaces were smooth, not from wear but from something else entirely. He tucked it into his pocket and moved on, unaware he was holding a rare, improperly manufactured planchet error. It was only weeks later, comparing it to a standard 2003 nickel under stronger magnification, that he realized what had been missed. This was not post-mint damage. This was something far more elusive. A design struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination, or one roll too thin. Or perhaps he hesitated to let the thought form fully. A foreign planchet. Research followed. Hours at the library, consultations on obscure coin forums, scanned copies of mint errors to look for, from worn-out guides, each page suggesting, hinting, daring him to believe. He sent images to a numismatic society, expecting skepticism. What he received instead was a request in the coin. In person, the process was not swift. Authentication came with its own delays, its own suspicions. But the final analysis was unequivocal. This was a 2003 Jefferson nickel, mistakenly struck on a planchet not meant for it, possibly a 1.5G copper-plated zinc, the type used for pennies. And not just any planchet. There were indications of an international origin, possibly struck on a planchet intended for a coin minted for a foreign country by the U.S. Mint. An errant blank, slipped in during production, unnoticed by automated feeders and human eyes alike. The revelation spread slowly, first among the forums, then whispered at coin shows. A single error could be an accident. Two might be a coincidence. But by the time a third example was verified, each one with subtle differences in planchet composition and strike depth, there was talk of a miniature series. Accidental, but linked. Collectors began to scrutinize their 2003 nickels with renewed fervor. Prices rose modestly at first, a few $100s for a verified example, then more. By 2008, a well-preserved piece sold privately for $2,100. In 2012, another surfaced, this time with even more dramatic weakness on the reverse and a weight slightly below standard. It fetched $3,750 at auction. These weren't ordinary error coins. They were an echo of an oversight that had become increasingly rare in modern minting, where lasers and computers all but guaranteed uniformity. And yet, each error held subtle differences. Some had full rims, but weak centers. Others showed die polishing lines, as if the mint had attempted to correct something mid-strike. A few even exhibited doubling on the legends, suggesting a die clash or misalignment. With each variation came renewed curiosity. Had this been a single day of production? A batch of tainted blanks? Or, more tantalizingly, had the mint briefly used leftover foreign stock in a domestic run? Theories abounded. Some proposed that the error planchets were leftovers from coinage mint for El Salvador, where the U.S. Mint produced coins in similar dimensions. Others pointed to blanks used for test strikes that somehow ended up in circulation. But no official explanation was ever released. The mint remained characteristically silent, its records sealed behind layers of bureaucracy, and time.as scarcity became apparent and interest grew. So did the stakes. By 2018, a high-grade specimen certified by PCGS as MS66 was rumored to have sold in a discreet collector's circle for $7,200. Not confirmed, just whispered. But it was enough. Dealers began hunting them with fervor, flipping through bags of nickels once deemed worthless. A coin once worth 5 cents had crossed the threshold into the domain of investment-grade rarity. The turning point came, curiously, not from another error surfacing, but from what didn't. For 3 years, not a single new specimen emerged. It was assumed the population had been exhausted, that whatever window allowed the error to slip through had closed forever. Prices surged on the few that remained. Then, in 2022, a twist. A collector in San Diego listed a 2003 nickel online, claiming a double denomination strike. The photos were grainy, poorly lit. Few paid attention, until a numismatist spotted something uncanny. Beneath Jefferson's face, faint but undeniable, was the ghostly image of a Roosevelt dime. The coin had been struck first with a dime design, then overstruck with the nickels. An impossibility, most said. But upon testing, it proved authentic. A dime planchet, struck once with a Roosevelt die, had then been refed and struck with a Jefferson die, creating a hybrid. The rarity was unquantifiable. This wasn't just an off-metal strike or weak design. It was a collision of two denominations in one moment of utter manufacturing confusion. A coin that should never have existed. It sold at auction for $16,400. The listing made headlines in numismatic circles. The 2003 nickel error was no longer just a curiosity. It was a phenomenon. And yet, the value didn't stop climbing. That same year, another previously unknown error surfaced, not on a planchet from a different denomination, but one made of aluminum. It weighed barely more than a feather, lacked a reeded edge, and rang hollow when tapped. Experts were divided. Could it have been a test piece? A pattern strike? Or had the mint once experimented with alternative metals for nickels, and this was the lone survivor? Authentication took months. But the verdict was startling. It was genuine. And likely unique. The coin sold privately for an undisclosed sum, but industry insiders whispered a figure in the high 5 digits. Some say it approached $80,000. Others claim it never truly sold, but was traded exchanged for a portfolio of rare proofs and gold pieces. Either way, it was clear. The 2003 nickel had become a canvas for error, a rare and unexpected stage for one of the mint's most mystifying chapters, and through it all, the original collector, the man who found that first rimless coin in a pile of pocket change, watched in astonishment. He had long since sold his discovery, modestly, for a few $1,000s. enough to pay off his car and buy a better magnifier. He didn't regret it, not really. For him, it had never been about the money. It was about the chase, the story, the quiet thrill of knowing he had spotted something the machines and the masses had missed. Today, the 2003 Nickel Error series, if it can be called that, remains one of modern numismatics' most peculiar sagas. A handful of known specimens, each with its own quirks. No formal acknowledgement from the mint. No official production figures. Just scattered anomalies, bonded by coincidence and discovery. Their value continues to climb, fueled by mystery, scarcity, and the quiet hope that, somewhere out there, in the back of a drawer or beneath couch cushions, one more might be waiting. Unassuming. Misunderstood. But priceless. In the quiet hum of production lines inside the Denver Mint in 2022, a familiar rhythm pulsed through metal and machinery. Sheets of cupronickel alloy fed through dies, stamping Jefferson's profile with mechanical precision. The machine's word, coins clinked into massive hoppers, and workers moved with practiced efficiency under high-intensity lights. For most, it was a routine year in a long line of years. The 2022 nickel was to be no different than its predecessors, a continuation of the design featuring Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and Monticello on the reverse. Everything appeared ordinary, but as history has shown, anomalies are often born in the most routine of circumstances. At first, the error passed unnoticed. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of coins bearing the year 2022 moved swiftly from production to packaging, then out into circulation, hidden in rolls, vending machines, and grocery store drawers. There were no alarms, no warning signs, just a small, almost imperceptible deviation. And yet, for those who would later recognize it, this deviation would become monumental. Miles away, in a quiet suburb just outside of Dayton, Ohio, a retired postal worker named Gerald Monroe, now an avid coin collector, was sorting through a $100 box of bank-wrapped nickels. It was something he did once or twice a week, more out of habit than expectation. His fingers moved quickly, trained from years of roll hunting, his eye trained for the slightest misalignment, the tiniest double die, or a subtle shift in relief. That day, his rhythm slowed. One particular 2022 nickel caught the light in a strange way. He rotated it, puzzled. Jefferson's eye looked slightly off. The motto, "In God We Trust," appeared thicker than usual, almost swollen. He blinked and fetched his 20x loop. Under magnification, the oddity became clearer. There was doubling, not just faint, ghostly shadows, but bold, shelf-like impressions. The letters, Liberty, and the date, 2022, both bore the unmistakable traces of a double die. The mint mark, a crisp D, was untouched, but the rest whispered of a deeper story. Gerald sat back, heart beginning to thud. He'd seen his share of misleading die deterioration, machine doubling, and minor strike-throughs. This wasn't that. This was different. He ran a few tests, confirmed the thickness of the letters, the orientation of the doubling, and checked for die markers. There was no doubt in his mind he had stumbled onto a true double die obverse, an error almost unheard of in recent nickel production. But the path from discovery to confirmation is rarely direct. He posted photos to a coin forum under his pseudonym, CoinHawk62, unsure of what kind of reception he'd get. Within hours, responses flooded in, some skeptical, others cautiously optimistic. One user, a numismatist from Colorado, requested clearer images. Another pointed out that Jefferson's nose bridge showed telltale signs of a double die previously undocumented. By the next week, Gerald had mailed the coin to a third-party grader. Weeks passed. When the slab coin returned, it bore the grade MS67 and the label, 2022 D5C double die obverse, FS101. The FS designation confirmed it had been cataloged in the recognized 5S Stanton reference, the first such listing for a 2022 nickel. Gerald's heart soared. But what began as an isolated find quickly spiraled into something larger. Other collectors combed their rolls, and began reporting additional examples, some in circulated condition, others still gleaming with mint luster. But all bore the same characteristics: strong doubling on the obverse, consistent die markers, and perhaps most curiously a die crack extending through the bottom loop of the second, too, in the date. It wasn't just an error, it was a known die variety now, with only a handful of confirmed specimens surfacing. Collectors began referring to it in shorthand, the shifting Jefferson variety. Its value didn't spike immediately. At first, eBay listings hovered around $40 to $60, with raw examples fetching modest premiums. Then a certified MS-66 sold at auction for $310. A few weeks later, an MS-67 brought in $875. Speculation swirled. Were there more examples to be found? Was this a new frontier for modern nickel collectors? The price curve bent slowly upward. Over the summer, the chatter intensified. A numismatic YouTuber featured the error in a 10-minute breakdown that went viral among collectors, drawing attention from a wider audience. Local dealers saw increased demand for 2022 D-nickels. Coin shows became grounds for whispered inquiries. "Have you seen the Jefferson double yet?" became a question asked in hushed tones at glass-covered booths. But even as the variety gained traction, its full significance hadn't yet crystallized. Then came the twist. In early 2023, a collector named Marissa Torres from Phoenix stumbled onto a curious piece, a 2022 D-nickel with doubling on both the obverse and reverse. Her coin showed the same shifting Jefferson effect on the front, but the Monticello side bore its own peculiar anomaly. The pillars of the building were faintly doubled, and the legend, "E pluribus unum," appeared to shimmer with an echo of misalignment. Her submission to PCGS was met with initial skepticism. Dual-sided doubling was rare, almost unheard of in modern coins. But the coin was authenticated, and experts confirmed a previously undocumented double die reverse. A dual double die 2022 D-nickel had surfaced. It was a numismatic first for the denomination in that year. And suddenly, the story shifted again. Collectors re-examined their coins. A few more dual examples were located, each displaying the same unusual features. The error wasn't just a single die mistake. It suggested something more systemic, a faulty setup during a specific production window at the Denver Mint, likely involving a misaligned hub during die creation. This opened the door to a limited yet traceable population, and the hunt for the Denver Window Die series began. By autumn, major grading services had certified fewer than 40 coins with the doubled obverse, and only 4 with the rare dual-doubled configuration. Prices skyrocketed. One MS-67 Plus dual-doubled example changed hands privately for a rumored $5,000, unconfirmed but widely discussed. Dealers whispered about a potential 5-figure sale if the right buyer emerged. A sense of frenzy simmered beneath the surface of the modern coin collecting community. Gerald, now the unwitting grandfather of the variety, found himself fielding emails from journalists, podcasters, and coin historians. He declined interviews, but agreed to write a detailed timeline of his discovery, which was later archived in Numismatic News Monthly. The narrative fascinated readers not just for the error itself, but for the way it transformed an ordinary coin into a conduit for story, curiosity, and discovery. Meanwhile, another thread was beginning to unravel. A researcher at the University of New Mexico specializing in minting anomalies published a paper proposing that the doubling seen in the 2022 D. Jefferson nickels wasn't entirely accidental. His theory? The error might have originated from a test hub used during a brief calibration period in early January 2022. Normally, test hubs are never supposed to end up in production. But in this case, a logistical error or possibly a miscommunication during die transfer may have introduced this faulty die into the active press rotation. The implication was explosive. If true, it meant the shifting Jefferson variety was born from an internal misstep, a procedural deviation so minute that it slipped through quality control, but resulted in one of the year's most coveted error varieties. What began as a routine coin had now become a case study in institutional oversight, and as more collectors heard the tale, demand surged once again. Coin World ran a feature on the 2022 D errors, dubbing them the Mirage Nickels, because of how easily their features could be overlooked by the casual eye, yet how significant they were beneath the surface. In early 2025, a major auction house announced the inclusion of a pristine, high-grade dual-double 2022 D nickel in its spring rare coin event. It was the finest known example, a MS-68 with full steps, a designation indicating an extraordinary strike. The bidding war was fierce, with private collectors and institutions vying quietly behind the scenes. The final hammer fell at an astonishing $14,300 from a bankroll to an auction block. From anonymity to national recognition, the journey of the 2022 D 5-cent era traced the delicate arc of discovery, uncertainty, obsession, and reward. For every collector still hunting nickels in spare hours, it was a reminder that treasure doesn't always glitter in gold or silver. Sometimes, it lies tucked in the copper-nickel ridges of change we pass off without thought, and sometimes, it stares back with a doubled gaze, hiding a story in plain sight. In early 2023, the rhythmic hum of machines echoed through the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia, tirelessly pressing Jefferson's profile into gleaming nickel blanks. For decades, the process had been nearly flawless, sterile, streamlined, and efficient. The 5-cent coin, simple in its function and design, hadn't stirred much excitement in numismatic circles since the days of the wartime silver alloys. But sometimes, even in systems fine-tuned to perfection, anomalies slipped through, anomalies that would later alter the fate of collectors and redefine the boundaries of rarity. That year, the U.S. Mint had updated certain mechanical components on its aging die-press machines. These adjustments were meant to correct minor alignment issues and improve the clarity of the Monticello detail on the reverse side. Unknown to the operators, however, one press station toward the southern end of the facility had begun to malfunction in a barely perceptible way. It misaligned dies not vertically, but rotationally. This resulted in a subtle but distinct feature, a rotated die error. Normally, the obverse and reverse designs on U.S. coins are perfectly aligned, spin 1, and the reverse should appear upright. But these few flawed coins, struck under obscure and time-sensitive conditions, bore a design offset by precisely 85 degrees. Too little to be immediately obvious to the untrained eye, yet just enough to turn a standard 5-cent piece into an enigma. Miles away, in a quiet Virginia town, a collector named Lena Foster sifted through her weekly change, as she had done habitually for years. It had always been a routine, part nostalgia, part curiosity. She wasn't looking for anything specific that day in early April. The coffee was still hot in her mug, and sunlight filtered through lace curtains as she flipped through the stack of coins on her dining table. Her thumb paused when she turned over a 2023 nickel. The reverse image of Monticello didn't stare back from its usual upright perch. Instead, it leaned sideways, skewed like an old photograph hung crooked on a wall. Lena squinted, rotated the coin, and frowned. The date on the obverse was crisp, Jefferson's profile sharp as ever, but the reverse betrayed something off. She had seen rotated die errors before, in textbooks and auctions, but never in person. Never like this. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her magnifying lens. The more she examined it, the more convinced she became that this was no post-mint damage. The die impression was clean. There were no signs of tampering, no evidence of work consistent with artificial manipulation. Her heart raced. She waited, photographed it, and posted to a forum she trusted, CoinCircle, a tight-knit digital haven for serious collectors. Within hours, comments poured in. That's definitely a rotation. 85 degrees, maybe more. Could be a new mint error. Never seen that on a 2023. Theories swirled. Some suggested it was a one-off anomaly. Others speculated a batch had slipped out undetected. As the days passed, 2 more users reported similar finds. Not exact, but similar 2023 nickels with various degrees of rotation. The chatter grew. Then, a prominent numismatist Raphael Dunn added fuel to the fire. In a detailed post, he confirmed that he had acquired a 2023 nickel with an 85-degree rotation and authenticated it through independent grading. Now the hunt was on. Coin dealers across the country began checking inventory. Collectors revisited old stacks. The 2023 nickel, once dismissed as another modern issue unlikely to ever appreciate, was suddenly in the spotlight. Grading services, like PCGS and NGC, began to receive submissions flagged for suspected rotation errors. And with each certified example, the narrative grew. At first, the coins fetched modest premiums, $20, then $75. But scarcity spoke louder than speculation. By late summer, only 8 confirmed rotated die 2023 nickels had entered the known pool. Prices jumped. One certified MS-67 example sold quietly for $680 on an online auction platform. But even then, whispers of something bigger circulated behind closed doors. In September, a collector in Oregon submitted a near-pristine 2023 nickel to PCGS. The rotation measured exactly 85 degrees. But it wasn't just the alignment that stunned the graders. The coin exhibited a double strike, a faint but verifiable shadow of Jefferson's jawline, repeated just north of its intended placement. A rare error overlapping with another error. The odds were astronomical. It was Raphael Dunn who confirmed it first. He called it a dual anomaly, a misaligned double strike with rotational offset. Only one had ever been documented in modern nickel minting history, and that dated back to 1969. The 2023 version, he predicted, would eclipse it. Suddenly, value became a guessing game. Offers came in private and fast. One bidder from New York placed a 5-figure offer through a mediator. It was declined. The coin's owner, a young college student named Brent Holloway, had only started collecting coins during the pandemic. He had pulled the nickel from a soda machine change tray on campus. Now he held a 5-cent coin potentially worth more than his tuition. The coin community buzzed with excitement. Yet, with excitement came skepticism. Some questioned whether the double strike was genuine or the result of planchet movement. Others suspected die fatigue. PCGS stood by its classification. So did NGC. By the year's end, the market had shifted. Regular 2023 rotated die nickels in MS-65 or higher now sold routinely for $950 to $1,200. Lower grade examples hovered in the $400 to $600 range. Only 17 were certified. The number hadn't budged in weeks. Then came the twist. A retired mint employee, known only by his forum alias, Echo Die, came forward with an anecdote. He had worked on the very press suspected of the error and confirmed that a rotational calibration malfunction had occurred in February 2023. The mint had halted that machine's operation briefly, correcting the fault before resuming production. He estimated no more than 200 coins could have been struck during that period and fewer than 30 might have survived initial quality control. But it was his next statement that stunned the community. Among those 200, one planchet had struck not with nickel-clad composition, but with a leftover 2022 copper-nickel alloy blank, a transitional anomaly. It had been fed into the wrong bin and stamped unknowingly with 2023 dies. That meant a composition error layered on top of the rotated die error. No one had seen such a coin yet. But now everyone was looking. Rumors swirled. A Midwest collector claimed he had seen one in a coin shop but passed on it, thinking the color was due to environmental toning. Another said they found a reddish-toned 2023 nickel in their laundry and accidentally spin it. And then, in late February 2024, it surfaced. A coin dealer in Arizona listed what he called a very odd 2023 nickel on an obscure auction site. The photos were grainy. The coin appeared more bronze than silver. Its reverse was clearly rotated, though the angle was hard to measure. Raphael Dunn spotted it first. He contacted the seller within hours and arranged for a personal inspection. The coin was genuine. A 2023 5-cent piece struck on a leftover 2022 copper-nickel planchet with an 85-degree rotated die and subtle doubling on Jefferson's collar. A trifecta. Offers came in like storm clouds, one for $35,000, another for $42,500. Dunn himself offered $50,000, but was turned down. The dealer, now fully aware of what he held, decided to place it in a high-profile auction with a major house. When the hammer fell weeks later, it shattered records. $71,000 for a nickel minted less than 2 years ago. Collectors looked again at their change. Forums erupted in fresh threads. The U.S. Mint made no official statement, but quietly acknowledged a brief anomaly in its 2023 production report. In the aftermath, the 2023 rotated die nickel became a symbol not just of a mechanical mishap, but of what still hides in plain sight. A reminder that even the most ordinary objects, under the right conditions, can carry within them stories of immense rarity, astonishing error, and unthinkable value. The nickel was no longer just change. It was history, etched slightly sideways, waiting to be turned upright by those curious enough to see it for what it was.